Okay, so basically the title for this panel is Dystopias, right? And my job here is to moderate this panel. We have with us Aisha Chapra and Framji Minwala, who are the main discussants. And what I'm going to do right now is just going to present a brief framing of what dystopias, what implications the word dystopias has in the context of this book launch. And then we're going to give the floor to these two to share their views with us, and then I'm just going to jump in whenever I feel that I'm required, all right? So basically, dystopia or dystopias is a word that is considered to have its origins in the work of George Orwell, right? And everybody must be aware of Orwell and his novel 1984, right? And basically, there are a few basic parameters, right, by which we understand what the implications of dystopias are, right? So basically, these few parameters are basically an invasion of personal privacy, right? Either directly, physically, or indirectly by surveillance. And this is in the context of the state, right? Keeping surveillance on the citizens, right? In the context of Orwell's novel, right? The second is state control of its citizens' daily life, like in a Big Brother society. Official encouragement of policies contributing to the socio-economic disintegration of the family and the kind of erasing of your individual personality, right? The adoration of state leaders and their party, the encouragement of doublethink, whereby the population must learn to embrace inconsistent concepts without dissent, the revision of history in favor of the state's interpretation of it. And basically, you guys get the general idea, right? It is the use, in the context of this novel, it is the use of technology by the state or by the powers that be to infiltrate into our lives and keep a close eye on sort of who we are and what we're doing, and use technology to influence us and to brainwash us into thinking in the way that the state would like us to think, right? And this is a general kind of framing of what dystopias is taken to mean. And I'm going to now go over to Aisha and Framji to kind of contextualize this, keeping in mind the book and share their ideas with us.
Thanks, Fauzi. So thank you all for being here. And I haven't read the book, so I should say that first and foremost. But I have read 1984, and actually some of my favorite novels have been dystopic in nature. I think I remember reading Brave New World when I was 15. And then I read a book by Margaret Atwood called Oryx and Crake, which is still one of my all-time favorite novels that I've read. And it's set in the future when there's only one person alive, and his name is Snowman. And for the brief memory I have of that book is that he recounts the events that led up to the end of the world. And it is all based on technology and the manipulation of technology, and same with 1984 and Brave New World. I think one of the purposes for books like this is to allow us to reflect on the things that we have that we take for granted. And even though perhaps more and more of us are invested in technological communications, and we are most probably surveyed more than we realize, I think it's not that bad as it is in the books. So it gives a healthy sense of fear, like maybe I don't want to go there in my lifetime. I don't want my society to be like this, where I can't be myself, I can't dress how I want, I can't speak how I want, I can't choose different things that I have the luxury to choose. And in terms of my engagement with the digital media, I mean, I am a Facebook addict, self-declared. I actually leave Facebook twice a year specifically so that I get a break from the internet. And then I shut off my phones, my computer, sometimes for a month, sometimes for 2 weeks, depending on how much time I can get. And I really treasure that time as well, but I also really treasure the fact that I can connect and communicate in an incredible way through social media. So why is social media so attractive to me? That's what I was thinking when I came in for the earlier panel. I said, why do I want to be on Facebook? What do I get out of it? And living in Karachi, I think there are very few spaces for me to be who I am, frankly. To be as open as I want, or perhaps to share my views without any fear. And Facebook and the internet is a place where I can really construct my own identity in a way I'm controlling, and it's safe for me, and maybe someone's watching it, and that's a scary thought. But if someone's watching it, and if someone's recording it, and it gets to a point where I can be put into jail for my thoughts and views, then I think digital media will be used by the state for a specific reason. But I don't really anticipate that, actually. I don't think it's going to be so, it isn't so apparent. It's not going to be so, it's going to be much more subtle, and it has been much more subtle. And the way media has used tools to perpetuate ideals and myths and ideologies for 100 years now it's always been a little subtle. It's never been so overt. And I think about Noam Chomsky, and I think about manufacturing consent, and how we don't even know we're being sort of told what to think. We think we're very liberal or very open, or we think we're very conservative. We give ourselves labels, and it takes quite a, I think, interesting moment in your life where you go, oh, why am I putting myself in these boxes? And why am I talking about what the media wants me to talk about? How does that even happen? So on Facebook, I'm really curious always, whenever there's an incident, how my news feed is almost everybody has the same thing to say. I mean, it's as if there's no other event happening anywhere around in your own life around the world when a media event sort of takes over. Be it, I mean, we live in an incredible place, to say the least. Be it a violent attack in a certain city, be it a superstar or a hero or a celebrity and something that's happened to them, whatever it is, or a cricket match, or rain. I mean, any event that seems to hold the interest of individuals suddenly becomes this perpetual newsfeed. And this newsfeed, I think, is where I get a little bit concerned. I think, how is it that in my Facebook list, which includes people from all kinds of backgrounds, ages, nationalities, and ethnicities, how come everybody's talking about the same thing? And I think that's where we need to become a little bit more reflective about how do we use media and what do we use it for. I think a gentleman he said in the last panel, what type of subject do we want to be? And so I always turn the mirror back on myself, and I think, how do I become a better consumer of media when I'm on social media, and how do I critically consume? So that I can use these tools for the benefit that they allow me, but then at the same time acknowledge that there is always just a small sort of step away. I can also be brainwashed or sort of convinced to believe or see things in a way that perhaps they aren't. I don't know if it's making sense to a lot of people what I'm saying, but I think a lot of times my engagement with digital technology is completely individual. I don't really actually think of it as a larger thing that happens outside of my room, outside of my laptop. I mean, it's my time, it's my space, it's how I unwind, it's how I talk to people, get to know people. I do almost all my work on the internet. Everything I do is based on it. So I can't imagine having a job actually without the internet also. So I think that's also going to become more and more common. All of us are, all our work, all of our, so we have to have a healthy relationship with it. We can't totally negate its positives, but we can't also be only looking at it as a positive thing. It's more complex. It's, but for me, it's definitely not, in this moment at least, dystopic. Does it have the potential to become dystopic? Yes, I'm sure it does, because everything could have that potential. But ultimately, I think for now, it's more of a force of creating openness and communication than a force of creating divisions and animosity between people.
I have one here.
That's fine.
Yeah? All right, so, is it on? So, Fuzzy, I don't mean to correct you, but the first actual use of the term dystopia was in a parliamentary speech in 1880, which is well before 1984. And it was used by, can you all hear me? Yeah.
We don't.
Yeah. It was used by John Stuart Mill in a speech in Parliament where he was bemoaning. We're recording. Yeah, it was used by John Stuart Mill in a parliamentary speech specifically bemoaning the industrialization of London and the way in which a parliament itself was controlling the processes of industrialization and also throwing hundreds of people, thousands of people out of work. That the machine had in some ways taken over the livelihoods of an entire generation of British citizens, and he uses the term specifically to refer to London as now a dystopian place or a city. But dystopia has a much longer history than that. I mean, at least as far back as the construction and dissemination of religious origin stories, right? The idea that in certainly the Abrahamic religions, the idea that Adam and Eve lived in a paradise and they were cast out of paradise because they ate from the tree of knowledge, and that the casting out was a casting out from Eden or from some kind of utopian place into a dystopian land, earth, where essentially they would have to struggle and toil and work and labor in order to regain salvation or regain paradise in the afterlife. That is actually very much part of the discourse on dystopia and the narratives that we understand as dystopian. Can I make one small correction also? That we tend to use the adjective dystopic as a descriptive term, but dystopic is actually really a medical term, and it refers to the misplaced location of a particular organ in the body, and not dystopian, which is the adjective that refers to dystopia. So, and any number of medieval narratives, any number of Renaissance narratives structure an opposition between a kind of pastoral utopia and that pastoral utopia somehow being undermined or being corrupted by forces that are technological, artificial, and human particularly. That in fact we are despoiling the earth and we are the problem. That essentially, one of my favorite science fiction narratives, The Day the Earth Stood Still, is exactly about that. It is exactly about how in fact humans themselves have created our own dystopias, and that without humans in the mix, right, the earth will flourish. With us there, the earth will die, right, which is the sort of narrative that the opposition that's created in that film. But I want to start somewhere else. I want to start with actually Darko Suven, who's a professor of literature at McGill in Canada. In the 1970s, theorized utopias, and his argument about utopias, and by contrast also dystopias, was that they are utopias essentially are a socio-political subgenre of science fiction. that utopias and dystopias are a form of fantasy or science fiction where we prognosticate about the future, that we make sense of the future in relation to our current social conditions. So what he says is that utopias are an imaginary community in which human relations are organized more perfectly than in the author's community, or the community in which the author actually lives. He sort of talks about a future community that will be better somehow in a utopian context. Dystopian narratives do exactly the opposite, that they talk about a set of social conditions that, if carried to their extreme, will lead to the kinds of totalitarian states that Fawzi mentioned in his. So essentially, utopias and dystopias are really science fiction categories. So when we're talking about the effect of the net in the future, or the internet in the future, we are in the realm of fantasy and of science fiction, because we really can't know. We have no idea where this technology is going to lead us, and we don't know where we will end up. I mean, prognostications about doom, that the internet is going to essentially crush human society or fundamentally change human society as we know it, either for the better or for the worse, are simply that. They're prognostications, right? And they also assume one of the fundamental things that I think Ahmed is going to talk about on the next panel, is that it is in fact the technology that is going to do that, and it's not the human actors who engage or use the technology that will actually accomplish this. Okay? I want to go on to a separate quote, a separate way of thinking about dystopias. So Raymond Williams, who's a social and cultural theorist from the 50s and 60s and 70s in England, said the following about that the subjunctive future perfect is the logically informing tense of dystopia. And what he's doing is he's talking about dystopia as a metaphorical or literary construct, right? And the subjunctive future perfect tense is a tense that we use in language or in English. The subjunctive is the mood of possibility or potential. It's usually used in conditional statements like, if we do this, then we will accomplish that, right? Conditional statements. The future perfect is a tense that discusses a future action that will be completed in the action based on or relative to a set of present actions. So the subjunctive future perfect tense as a linguistic or semantic semantic way of expressing dystopias suggests that if we continue the conditional along the path that we have engaged today, we will end up in this place, right, that Winston in 1984 ends up, or any number of other sort of characters who have been co-opted into a system not of their own making, essentially. So if the subjunctive future perfect is the logically informing tense of dystopia, then in some ways we are always talking about dystopian narratives as somehow imaginative. This is going back to also what Darko Suven says, imaginative or fantasy narratives, right? And part of the problem that we have as living in this moment is that we have plenty of both utopian and dystopian narratives with which to compare our understandings of technology, the development of technology, right? Most recent examples, and clearly films, all sorts of films in our popular culture do this. Any superhero film is about a dystopia. It's about a dystopia that will come into being but for the efforts of the superhero in preventing it. So Batman prevents Bane or the Joker or any number of other characters from creating a dystopian universe, and it is by his heroic efforts that he manages to do this. Superman, exactly the same thing, right? Bruce Willis in the Die Hard films, McClane, exactly the same things, especially Die Hard 4, where it's all about the ways in which digital technology will actually burn down an entire society or an entire culture. So in a sense, the cinematic narratives are always playing with these notions of dystopia and utopia and what is possible and what is not possible, and the ways in which we need heroic figures, especially heroic figures in this vein, right? Either the superhero policeman or the actual superhero, the Avengers is another example of this, or even the chosen one in my favorite sequence of films, the Matrix sequence, right? Where the chosen one, Neo, with all of his religious symbolic significance, comes down, is extracted from the machine in order then to destroy the machine, or actually to create a certain kind of balance between the machine and the promised land, which is Zion, where they all live underground, away from Machine City, where they have a human life as opposed to a digitally generated life, right? So, in a sense, our imaginations are completely structured by this binary opposition between utopias and dystopias, and we don't seem to be able to actually imagine or dream outside of this binary opposition. That the dialectic that this opposition creates has fundamentally structured the way we understand the ideology of the net. So the internet itself is either going to be a huge boon to mankind, democratize our society, allow everybody to have as much to gain and to accumulate as much information as possible to make informed judgments and informed decisions as global citizens, or we are sailing into a universe where technological control is going to dominate how we think, what we think, where we think, and what we can and cannot do, right? We don't seem to have any alternative between the two. It's one or the other. And I think that, you know, this kind of binary thinking traps us. It traps us in exactly the problem that these guys have, Eric Schmidt and Jared Cohen, who are writing from a particularly market-structured or capitalist-structured point of view. They're writing about the way in which the internet is going to transform how people do business, primarily, right? They're talking about how the internet is going to transform how we make money in this new information society, or how we actually structure our lives in relation to the accumulation of information and knowledge, how human-computer interaction is somehow going to reduce the necessity of menial tasks, or reduce, right, this is one of the mantras of the industrial age in the 19th century, that machines will now do the work that humans used to do, and it'll free up humans for more quote-unquote creative endeavors, as if somehow every human is going to engage in some of these so-called creative endeavors, or even have the wherewithal to do it, without ever thinking about the fact that if these people are thrown out of work, they're not going to have the money to actually live lives at all, right? So, in a sense, part of what I'm trying to suggest is that the very notion of a dystopian world controlled through internet technologies or digital technologies, the kind of world that we see the NSA actually manipulating to their advantage, is really not the end of the way in which we understand our existence. It's going to certainly change us, but it's not necessary. Thank you very much. But it's certainly not going to change us in the way that George Orwell prognosticated, or even that James Cameron prognosticates, right? One of my favorite recent films, not because it's a great film, but because it's so ridiculous, is Avatar, right? Where the opposition between a utopian and a dystopian universe is structured in an opposition between this world in which the entire native population is literally plugged into the earth, right? They can take their tails and they can actually connect with the soil. And on the other hand, and that's their utopian world, right? That is the world that capitalism is going to destroy, because they are mining this ridiculously named metal, unobtainium, and that this, and that, you know, and clearly named unobtainium as a way to critique this idea that really capitalism is seeking what is unobtainable, or that what it's structuring and what it's destroying is also the thing that is unobtainable, right? So the opposition that he creates in Avatar is very much an opposition of our time, right? Where technology itself, or the digital technology itself, the way in which is both being used to subvert and at the same time used to destroy. And in the subversion and destruction are structured in relation to each other. There is no outside of this. There is no outside of this binary opposition that James Cameron creates in this film. But then James Cameron does this in every film, right? Machines are bad, people are good. Except that even in the Aliens films, what's her name? Sigourney Weaver has to actually get into the machine to fight the alien, that she actually has to use the machine to destroy the machine in some ways. So maybe I'll stop there for right now. And
We get caught up in education in terms of topics, like we should teach them how to be on Facebook or whatever. But actually what I feel is would be really constructive is if we're able to engage people outside of binary thinking, which is a really challenging actually project for a teacher as well. Be able to not just intellectually explain that there's a right and a wrong or a black and a white, but there are so many shades of gray in between. And in terms of the movies you were discussing, I think our popular culture, religion, everything that you sort of get told as you're getting older and as you sort of mature in your life, they all, even politics especially actually, you tend to see that this binary structure is prevalent everywhere. And when you get rigid and stick to one side, you actually lose the ability to connect with others. And the internet is a remarkable space to connect with other people. And it's space, it's literally space. There's so much space on the internet. There are gigs and gigs and gigs of space. You'll find anything you want to find. Whatever perspective you have, you will be able to find something on the internet. I mean, it's actually, there is enough space, I believe, in technology for us to hold more than just two perspectives, which I'm really glad you brought it up that way because it really clicks with me. I think that's one of the most difficult, one of the most difficult brain sort of mind structures to work with, either or. And if we do want to change education, I think one of the ways we need to change education is to get out of these either or dynamics in terms of topics and how we also seem to elevate a certain type of thinking over other types of ways of doing. And we're constant, and on the internet, again, there's this incredible diversity of how to understand knowledge, how to find knowledge as well.
If I could just, coming back to, I mean, I'd really like to thank you, Framji, for the whole, for framing it in this way. And it helps facilitate the discussion enormously. Coming back to what we see happening around us, like everybody knows about what happened with James Snowden. Is that his first name? James Edward Snowden, right? And okay, so basically, the NSA was, surveilling email, telephone conversations, and all type of electronic surveillance on its own citizens. On its allies in Europe, and basically Edward Snowden was in the signal intelligence with the NSA, which is maybe one of the most secretive.
Private contractor with
Okay, and he basically was a private contractor, and he was working with the NSA.
Yes, he was contracted by the NSA to actually filter this information, to write programs that would filter information.
There's too much information.
And then what happened was that basically he, with the Guardian in the UK, released a lot of information about the activities the NSA was doing, and it was a real revelation, right?
It wasn't just the fact that major internet companies like Google,
Facebook
yeah.
everybody had cooperated with the NSA and released the information to them.
And
all our personal
so,
information.
in the context of this book, then, I'd like to put this to you guys. In the context of this book, where we're discussing a new digital age, and Eric Schmidt talks about states and territories and territorial laws versus, like the digital world, and there's a, in terms of a conflict, right? That over here you have a utopia where the virtual world, sort of is free of all these encumbrances like states and laws. And then you have, I'd just like to know what you would think on, about that.
Yeah, I don't think, is it on?
You can take that. There's one over there.
I don't think that's on. Hello? Yeah. So, one of the problems with what the NSA is doing, and one of the, not the problem in terms of ethical terms, but the problem in logistical terms, right, is that they're collecting information. So in 2007 or 8, they started building these massive, massive centers in the middle of the Midwest. Oh, not the Midwest, the Plain States, in Utah, and no, in Utah somewhere. And there were plenty of articles written then about why was the NSA building all these structures and what were they going to store there, right? And the NSA has, so what have they been doing? And this is not just recent. This has been happening for generations now. This has been happening at least since World War II, right? None of this should be a shock or a surprise. That the NSA collects information. That is their entire job. That is their function. They are the National Security Agency, and they collect information on whomever, wherever, whenever they can. Right? And they store it somewhere. That doesn't mean that anybody's actually looking at this stuff, right? So they are collecting billions and billions of phone calls, of emails. They claim, what they claim is that they are only looking at certain aspects of that, the metadata, right? The aspects of the information that tell you IP addresses, locations, and who is sending what to whom. That's what they claim. But in order to actually filter all of these communications, they need to hire hundreds of thousands of people. They collect 1 billion emails a day. So, you know, whether they collect, and why are they collecting this information? To keep America secure and safe, allegedly, right? There's this scene, there's this really fantastic scene in Terry Gilliam's 1985 film, Brazil. If anybody's seen Brazil, it's a really, if you've never seen it, you should see it. It's a great film. But there's this scene where the government actually is run by this one organization, and it's called the Ministry of Information. And it has 2 departments. There's information processing and information retrieval. Information retrieval is really the torture center, the interrogation and torture center, and information processing is essentially just a bureaucratic processing place. And they tell you, one of the things that the information minister, whose name is Mr. Helpman, Mr. Helpman tells you in the film, right, we're collecting all of this information because it's important that we collect it. And then somebody asks him, but what are you going to do with it? And he looks at them really blankly and says, what do you mean, what are we going to do with it? Right? As if this is a, right, obvious, there's an obvious answer to this question, but it is not an obvious answer to this question. I mean, how do you process 1 billion pieces of information every day? How many computer programs do you have to write to flag keywords? And even when you flag those keywords, right, any number of individuals can have used those words in completely benign contexts, but you still have to actually go through and look at the damn email or listen to the phone call. So, in a sense, the glut of information that the internet provides is no actual boon to the agencies like the NSA, right? And Edward Snowden's revelation, firstly, I have 2 things to say about Edward Snowden. One, he was working for the NSA. What the hell did he think they did, right? That this is a revelation to him, that suddenly they were amassing this treasure trove of information. And 2, right, why do it now, right? Why do it now when nobody actually, you know, Sabine was saying something about the American electorate and the American electorate being actually pissed off about the fact that Edward Snowden has, pissed off about what the NSA has done. But really the American electorate doesn't seem pissed off at all. It's been greeted by a huge big yawn. This is news internationally, but not inside America. In the US, everybody lives under the assumption that their information is being collected. The notion of privacy has been a myth for decades now. Nobody has any privacy. We haven't had any privacy since, I don't know, since before World War I.
I'd like to pick up on that point, if I could. Orwell basically was a colonial administrator in Burma. Yes. When he was inspired with this idea of the state, like a bureaucratic state, reducing its subjects to numbers, and you know, its function being to create like an army of like marching ants, you know, like that Apple ad, if any one of you guys have seen it. And that's is said to be one of his inspirations for the whole, you know, dystopic setting that he had for dystopian setting that he had for 1984. I just want to ask you now, coming back to this book today, where we're sitting, not in the future, not in the past, maybe a bit about the past to enlighten us. But what role, I mean, do you, because it's not even about ideology. You have, in terms of surveillance now, you have the US, which is like a democracy, a democratic state. You have India, which has come out with a legislation governing all types of surveillance over all type of electronic media. And these are societies which are open, so this is what you hear about. Then you have societies which are more closed. You have China, you have the whole, gamut of these societies, right? Which in terms of surveillance are keeping an eye on things, right? What I want to know from you, right, is that the state, right, whatever ideology, whatever country, whatever nationality, do you think that it is hardwired to surveil, if that's a word, right, number one? And number two, how much do you think technology is, okay, they're amassing this information and they don't know what to do with it, granted, right? But how much, their ability to amass this information. So there is no doubt that technology is facilitating it, right? Yeah, but this, what I want to get at is the state as a creature, right? Do you see it evolve? I mean, so you said for 100 years we've all been treated this way, and we're going to be treated this way in the future. So how do you see, the relationship with the state and technology? Technology was supposed to liberate us from these boundaries, if you want to, yeah.
Well, a couple of things. One is, I think we have to stop using the word democracy. I think democracy is like love, like everybody has their own definition of it. So that's one really difficult thing, because every time I hear that US is a democracy, I sort of cringe inside. And that's one thing, sorry. But in terms of states, as far as I know, nation states are really new. I'm always bad with numbers, but there's, 200 years, 300 years old? Nation states, the idea of nation states? No, more than that, 1648. So about 500 years. Yeah, Magna Carta, Westphalia. Yeah. So nation states are, in any case, in the human history that we have of however you believe it, 100,000 years or a million years plus, nation state is a really new way of identifying ourselves. So we are in a new relationship, basically. Humans are creating a whole different have created a whole different type of identity around being a nation. And Pakistan is peculiar because it has a very unique national sort of manifesto identity. It's sort of like an anti-nation, like anti-identity, like we are not this and we are not this. So we don't know how to define what we are. I think that's the first thing for me in terms of states. There's just a lot of diversity in nation states. And the relationship with technology is, obviously, I think states use technology for their advantage and for whatever they need to, and they want to maintain their power. And if it is useful to them, I'm sure they'll continue to collect information, but I think there is this strange thing that why are they doing it? Because I don't think they can actually go through it. They can't go through all the information they're collecting. And then this is not about all the information that people are sharing, the countries are sharing with one another. So there's agreements between countries, sharing information. And then emails is one thing, but then there's so many other ways we communicate on the internet. So, they're all collecting what? What are they actually collecting?
Go to Fawzi's question. So what is the relationship between the state and this technology, right? So a few months ago, right, this band in Lahore came out with a satirical song about the generals, right? Dinak Dinak. Isn't that how you pronounce it? My Urdu is really bad and my pronunciations are really bad. In any case, and the whatever ministry is in charge of it and blocked it. They got PTCL to block Vimeo where that particular video had been posted. Now, of course, blocking Vimeo doesn't actually stop people from accessing the video because it is available on 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 different sites, right? So one of the things that the state consistently attempts to do is control the way we engage with or use technology. And one of the ways that technologically savvy individuals one of the things that they do is find access to the content that they want to find access to, despite what the state actually does. The majority of people who are using the internet in Pakistan know how to access YouTube. You don't need to actually unblock YouTube because everybody has access to it anyway. You just use a workaround. You use a proxy server, and you get to it. So it's not as if the state actually has control. The state has the illusion of control over internet content, but it really doesn't have much control. And that the control that it actually exercises is never enough. It will never be enough because the internet is not, I mean, part of the problem for the state in relation to the internet is also the problem for the state in relation to terrorism, right? That it is stateless. If the internet was actually controlled by another nation state, or it was housed in some other nation state, it would be easier to control, right? If terrorism was housed in another nation state, it would be much easier to control. But the internet in terms of global communication, terrorism in terms of global terrorism, and capitalism in terms of multinational corporations are all flip sides of the same sets of the proliferation and the connectivity that communication has engendered for us in this world that we live in today. So I don't think that the state, I mean, as much as it wants to, and as much as it desires that kind of control, as much as it wants to control how we understand our national identity, right? One of the reasons for blocking YouTube and other kinds of sites is because it offends our national sensibility, as if somehow the national sensibility has feelings. But you know, it can't. There's no possible way it can do that because these things are fundamentally out of its control. And the more draconian measures it uses to exercise that control, the more creative ways individuals use or discover to work around them, right? So
I think that this is perfectly fitting in with that binary you were talking about earlier, which is that police state and then the agency of the sort of people who live under the earth, right? Who are trying to escape the clutches. So, you know, there's been a question that's been, 5 minutes left? Wow, that was quick. So since we have 5 minutes left, what I think I should do is that I think I should go to the both of you and ask you for any last words, and then I'll just sum up. And I think we'll close it. Is there a question period? Yeah, why don't we do that? I think that's better. Yeah. Comments, questions, but keep in mind we have 5 minutes, so I'll let Aisha pick whoever.
Thanks. I mean, I just have two comments to make, and one is about your Fremji, your point that when we're talking about dystopian societies, it's a form of science fiction. Actually, I wanted to correct you. For example, Margaret Atwood, who wrote Oryx and Crake and also The Handmaid's Tale, when asked whether her work was science fiction, she said no. Science fiction is aliens and with 8 heads and strange things that can't happen, and what I write more is speculative fiction. So, you know, thinking about what could happen. And the other point I wanted to make to you, where you said that it is the surveillance isn't so bad, that's not true, because actually we've seen in the Arab Spring, for example, people in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia have been arrested for tweets and for blogging and put in jail for months, and their lives have been in danger. So we're already in that future where technology is being used to imprison us. It's the only two comments I wanted to make.
That there are very serious material consequences to surveillance. I'm not denying that. What I'm trying to say is that, all I'm saying is that as much as the state attempts to control and to use surveillance as a means of control, right, there will always be, and there always have been, ways in which citizens of individual nations, or even within particular nations, have both subverted and escaped, used those means of control against the state itself. And that is one of the lessons of the Matrix, right? If we're going to look at the Matrix as one of these sort of dystopian projections into the future, that it is in fact the very use of digital technologies that destroys.
And one of the lessons of the Arab Spring as well, because it's what is keeping. like a cat versus mouse, you know.
Right. And the real enemy in the Matrix is not Machine City. It is not the architect and the oracle and the programs in Machine City. The real enemy in the Matrix is the agent Smith, who, as Irfan Keri once explained to me, is a greedy algorithm, right? Right? Is that an algorithm that takes up too much space or that keeps eating up space within the computer program? So really the enemy is, so the machines and Zion, or at least Neo, both agree that neither of them are the enemy. The real enemy is this outlying thing, subversive thing within the system itself. And it is to purge that thing, right? That Neo makes his sort of Faustian bargain with the machine, with the architect or Moloch or whatever that thing is, and dies, right? In this fantastic Christ-like image where the machines actually pick him up in this sort of crucifix fashion and then lay him out very gently after he's dead.
I also wanted to just say that considering the surveillance thing, it's been around for before when internet was our way of communicating. So in oppressive regimes around the world, for the even brief history we have, I mean, poets, artists, writers who said things against the state always face consequences that were, in my opinion, not appropriate to their actions. But we have a history of also doing that. So it is true to be a little bit careful in Pakistan in terms of what you say on the internet. I think that's, I mean, it depends what you want. I mean, people are watching and reading, and even if it's not the state, other people actually can create a lot of challenges. So I wanted to pick up on that because I know people who have said things on the internet, or done things, or put a picture up, and then they actually cannot leave their house because they're getting death threats from people who are anonymous on the internet. So that's actually a really strange, fearful kind of development, that there is a lot of anonymity on the internet, and people like to say horrific things also to other people. Yeah.
Okay, so in just winding up, I think that you'll all agree with me that this notion of the binary, whereby there are coercive forces, and the internet was kind of seen to be a world where those coercive forces would be powerless, you know, and it would be a brave, free sort of world for us to express ourselves as we see fit. That's proving, it's proving to be a sphere where this binary still persists, right? So it's kind of like a never-ending circle of, you know, free expression being, you know, clamped down upon or trying to be policed, and then making its way somewhere else and propping up somewhere else, you know. So everyone can identify it when they go to www.youtube.com and it comes up, PTA says this site is blocked. So everybody knows how annoying that is. And then everybody knows how grateful they are when someone tells them how to finally access that video they're looking for. So that's the binary playing out in everyday life. And I'm sure every one of you, no matter how old you are, can understand what dystopian ought to be understood as now. All right, thank you.